framework. Another design piece that's important to us, that comes, that's derived from this auction model, is the fact that bidding for control of the auction is actually very low risk. As a bidder, I'm contributing in USDC, which has a, fairly, relatively stable value. My bid can be directly compared to all other bids that are put in. There's no preferential treatment, around the potentially, thousands of difference of tokens that could be used for incentives. Everything is denominated and transacted in USDC, which makes the system very transparent and fair. Finally, as a bidder, if I am outbid, my money is simply returned to me. And, I can use it and I can actually go back and bid again. But there's really no downside risk to being a bidder or the support of the Bribe coalition. And this to us is extremely important because of the few kind of bribery-oriented products that have been launched in the past year. There is a huge difference in the performance of those products, which effectively guarantee outcomes for bidders. Those products in which the bidder can very easily, very transparently see their payoff or the value proposition of bidding, where the result of bidding is more or less guaranteed. These protocols can drive value. Protocols that simply direct incentives, that simply serve as a marketplace for governance tokens, are not novel and don't really fit the niche use case which is required. So hopefully that makes a bit of sense of why we defined how we define things this way. I think I would be remiss if I didn't kind of bring up though the final advantage of a bribe type model, specifically pertaining not to our auction model, but rather our pool structure. The thing is, bribe doesn't really exist truly as one single protocol. In the vein of more almost like an Olympus and its forks, Bribe offers a framework and an architecture to deliver governance markets in any DAO in DeFi. However, the impetus to actually expand governance markets to the DAOs and to do so in a correct, fair, safe, secure way, it's not on me and it's not on our core team. It is on the creators of the DAOs and the users of the DAOs themselves. Of course, we have to select a couple of use cases for Bribe. Aave, Tokamak, are the early use cases that we will build in this relatively centralized manner. However, the beauty of Bribe is that our pool structure essentially allows for forks of the protocol to be sponsored and maintained by the communities that really need those forks. So a Bribe pool for Uniswap would collect Uniswap, be owned by Uniswap stakers, involve use cases for Bribe, including liquidity bootstrapping. However, primarily it would stand on its own. And we've, from the ground up, built our architecture to kind of work this way. So a bunch to be excited about that's kind of new and coming down the pipeline. I guess if I imagined this conversation a couple of months ago, it would be defending the name of our product, defending voter extractable value, saying that bribery is a concept which should be embraced. The fact that a vote at a particular time actually has monetary value, that it should be traded in an appropriate and sophisticated way given the context in which it is important. But this has been proven. We have, at this point, charts and trackers for exactly how much a V-curve vote is worth during a particular decision. We have DAOs that have been built on top of DAOs to facilitate and do justice to the long-term value of a persistent voter. These ideas and market dynamics are starting to come to the fore. They're being clarified, and our argument at Bribe is that we continue to push them by continuing to build better and better products. How voters both act today, and honestly how they should be working, or how they should be acting and thinking as rational voters in the future.
I totally agree. There's a lot to unpack in in this first part. I think that the issue with, I don't think it's an issue, but I think people don't realize the power of what they have at this point, right? They're basically not looking at the numbers and not looking into the stats of how much their curve is worth or how much their convex is worth. Do you agree with that?
At least in the curve wars, I think we have a good understanding. We have good interfaces at this point that tell us the value of voting. What's kind of confounding to me is that the same exercise is not happening in other ecosystems. Now, of course, I can't just make that blanket statement. I'm sure probably each of us on this call has one example we could point to of, oh, well, there's a DAO that is thinking about monetizing voting, or there's Snapshot that thinks about making voting cheaper, or there's, maybe someone has a favorite delegate that they delegate their vote to, and it makes voting feel meaningful. But the conceptual exercise that we have simply failed to do, having watched the curve wars, is ask ourselves, well, why did the curve wars get this way? And why isn't this behavior happening everywhere else? I.e., how do we stay ahead of the curve here instead of reacting simply to what's happening? And to me, feel free to disagree. I feel like this is a very interesting question. To me, the curve wars got this way because Curve is a properly decentralized protocol. It has good governance mechanisms. It encourages consistent voting. And it is simply built properly, such as to be a tool for the community and tool for DAOs, rather than an insular organization, I suppose. And whether this is by happenstance or design, again, is a discussion that others can speak to better than I can. However, the fact remains that Curve is decentralized, Convex is, fairly decentralized, and to me, it only makes sense that robust, highly monetized, governance that people really care a lot about happens in these places where governance actually matters, where governance is properly decentralized. And so the question that I am left with is, well, where do we go next? And I think it's an obvious place to point to Tokamak. We've been building for the core reactor votes for some time now. Trying to figure out essentially the run rate for what that product is going to look like, which is an interesting kind of other conversation. But right, the question is really in Aave, for instance, what does this type of governance look like? In Uniswap, what does this type of governance look like? In some of the more traditional institutional protocols, if you will, that themselves, Maker, Yearn, that themselves, sorry to keep on listing names here, but they're all kind of interesting examples that are worth talking about. Substrate, Polkadot and Kusama, all kind of have different ways that their governance works or that it has been designed to deliver its purpose better. They all have different, essentially, like features or named functionalities of DAO, of how their DAOs run, and yet they all need effectively, to me, the same governance market. So again, we get back to Go ahead.
No, I agree. I would want to comment on essentially what you're helping with, or Bribe is helping with, is to allow retail users to be able to participate in these, I would say, whale type of protocols. Really, I mean, Curve, Maker, Yearn, and so, or even Uniswap. You're essentially opening up a more transparent marketplace for retail to participate in.
The example that I like, exactly, and this all boils down to what it means to be a voter in these ecosystems. So when we think about extending beyond Curve, right, I guess the fundamental thing that makes Curve a good place for kind of retail governance for this experiment is actually that the most important vote that happens on Curve, anyone can essentially participate in. This is these gauge incentive votings, right? Votes rather. So when I'm directing incentives on Curve, like, one vote is one vote. It has meaning by itself. However, the same is not necessarily true in, again, your more traditional DeFi protocol. On Aave or Uniswap, a vote only matters as far as it is like part of a winning coalition of votes. You need to have at least, backing your proposal, you need to have at least, anywhere from 30 million Aave to 300 million on Uniswap to even like hit quorum, to even have your proposal kind of considered. And I'm not sure if any of us have tried going through, like, your more traditional mechanisms like forums and Snapshot to get governance decisions picked up, but it just isn't really followed. It doesn't really work like that these days. That real governance and real decisions are being made on forums. I think we all understand that. So you really have to be a whale. Like, this is an over-the-counter game. You need to be a whale, or you need to like know the core team, or potentially, it's possible for an influencer to do this sometimes. But for a retail voter, like, it just never actually makes sense to vote in Aave governance. Why would I pay gas when, who cares about my literal, like, 3 Aave votes or something like this? And we see this play out in governance. So on Aave, for instance, the average number of wallets participating in a proposal is something like 30 to 40 wallets. Like, it is literally a shockingly small in-group that is participating in governance. And Bribe does offer the front end for any retail user to get in on the action. It becomes, well, kind of ironically, Bribe becomes this 31st voter on Aave. It is reflective of the participation of potentially hundreds or thousands of retail Aave voters who, would have had no interaction with governance if they weren't doing so through Bribe. It also means that Bribe, however, has, honestly, our team recognizes the responsibility that we're taking on by being sort of one of the only relevant governance interfaces right now. And that is that our interface needs to give voters, give users a good idea of what is happening in governance, and whether the bribery is okay, or is something that potentially they want to take a second look at, or even they would not want to be a part of. For that reason, Bribe has a couple of commitments to users. First of all, we'll always tell you exactly what your vote is going to be used for, i.e., when a bidder bids for control of the Bribe coalition, from day one, that bidder will also indicate what direction how they intend to bid, or how they intended to vote with control of the coalition. All of this is, it is of course implemented trustlessly. So the bidder will trigger their vote in our smart contract ahead of when the coalition actually votes. But the coalition will always know exactly how they are voting. Commitment number 2, we're not going to switch your governance tokens. We're not going to switch your vote into a different kind of vote on another platform without your knowledge. This is, of course, how, or rather, staking is one-to-one. There's no DeFi risk here. There's no like AMM risk. Bribe doesn't work as an AMM. It represents you as a voter. So an Aave vote will never become a tokamak vote unless you choose to do so, perhaps because the APY of holding the other token is higher. Finally, in addition to kind of making sure that people know always what is being done with their vote and what votes they hold, we will also make it maximally possible. We will make it as easy as possible for you to withdraw your vote from Bribe at any given time. So it's, this is probably worth diving into an example. On Aave, for instance, on our first, for the first Bribe pool on Aave. Aave has a veto device, essentially off-chain veto device called the Guardian Multisig, which serves as a good backstop against adverse behavior. I.e., if I'm a bidder and I bid for a coalition of Bribe votes and the vote is shut down Aave, I can pay to my heart's content to make sure that this proposal passes. However, it will never be executed because the Aave team will use the veto and cancel the proposal. So as such, we don't actually expect to see any adverse behavior coming through the platform. However, even if such a thing does happen, Bribe has its own backstop effectively, which is that the users, as they are seeing a proposal coming, can withdraw from the Bribe pool. And I mean, I don't know if at a certain point, I guess we're a small enough group. Like I'm asking you all to of course trust myself and the team that we care about governance. We care about this experiment going well. We're here because this is our passion. That's why we were here before the curve wars. However, frankly, it is ultimately, and this gets back to what I was saying in the last question. It's ultimately the responsibility of the user of a particular DAO's bribe pool. That is the Aave briber, or the tokamak briber, or the 1-inch briber. It is that person's responsibility to make sure that Bribe is working correctly. There is, today, in the status quo, there is no smart contract that we can write to ensure that bribery is always happening effectively. So the best thing that we can do is make it easy for you to withdraw your vote.
Wow, that's a lot to unpack. Well, let me let me start with, is obviously very detailed. What can you explain how much an Aave voter's vote is worth? Do you have an idea?
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. So if we go through this thought experiment, what we want to look for first is some kind of equivalency to curve. So where is the V curve incentive in Aave? And I believe what it is essentially the addition of new collateral types. Why? Well, it's not. While V curve is essentially determining, where is there going to be deep liquidity, where is there going to be a lot of trade volume, where is a token essentially going to be well supported, well hyped and potentially succeed, although these are more qualitative factors, V-curve does, I mean, we have to remind ourselves that V-curve is like not the primary business model of Curve. Curve is an exchange. People, we rarely kind of remind ourselves this in the context of the Curve wars, but it's important because kind of the way that the wars played out was not necessarily obvious. It had to do with V-curve's utility to external protocols, in that it provides obviously deep markets, liquidity, this kind of stuff. So in looking for parallel example on Aave, the obvious place where we go is new collateral types. On Aave, new collateral types are proposed all the time. Again, they sometimes come through, new proposals often come through governance forums, but they rarely kind of make it all the way to official on-chain voting for Aave. However, that is the mechanism through which new collateral types are added, and it is fairly decentralized insofar as new ideas, well-discussed ideas, ideas that make sense for the DAO are often highlighted and brought in. So it is a fairly decentralized mechanism that works, which is really exciting. However, we get to the same problem, obviously, that this market for adding new collateral types is primarily over the counter. I can't tell you exactly how it works, but it means that kind of let's say a new protocol that has not established a partnership is relatively locked out, in the same way like a retail voter is never going to be asked kind of, hey, can I get your Aave to back up my new proposal? It'll obviously always be like a whale or a VC or a core team member that is that is kind of approached over the counter for this level of support. So it's decentralized, but not fairly democratized, shall we say. At least there's not a transparent front end, for what's kind of going on behind the scenes here. Is that clear so far?
Yep, very clear. No.
So the value of the vote, and I think there's probably someone here who can do this off the cuff better than I can, but the value of the vote becomes how much does a third party benefit from having a pool listed on Aave? A lot of similar things that we're looking at here, right? Another use case for the token. Let's say that we're considering in this case, let's talk about MEM in this case. So it becomes another use case for the token. Markets, potentially, if it's not a stable coin, potentially kind of the price increases. There is potentially, by getting listed as a collateral type on Aave, there is less opportunity cost for holding the token, because it can, obviously be used to collateralize loans. Perhaps there's even like a third thing around kind of basing this off of the same general categories as Curve. Perhaps there's a third thing around getting listed on Aave's website. I mean, it's plenty of people traffic the app, and so this is potentially a marketing opportunity as well for or a partnership opportunity. So there are a lot of different reasons that a token, very like quantifiable reasons, frankly, that a token may want to get listed on Aave, and the value of a voter thus becomes, in lieu of it becomes a lot of things, right? Like you could build a whole model around this, but essentially the value that the voter is providing that gets monetized is that it becomes much easier to find someone to support a good idea, to support a new collateral type. And because there's now a front end for finding that support, whatever hassle or whatever price the bidder, the new collateral type wanter, was paying previously in this over-the-counter market, now they will be willing to pay to win the bribe auction. What's kind of funny about this is that from a game theoretical perspective, the situation begins strongly in favor of the bidder. As with any auction, there's kind of a very low starting price, which makes the coalition very attractive. However, the game theory, of course, is that there's a run-up of the price. So essentially, you would expect behavior to start on Bribe and then stay on Bribe because this is where the coalition is, this is where the activity is happening. So could I give you an exact dollar value of an Aave vote? No. Could somebody do that for Curve 3 months ago? Not a chance. But we will very quickly see that value come to fruition when the market kind of plays itself out a couple of times.
Interesting. Really interesting. And so do you think, so basically, in essence, Bribe will be able to create this transparency that can, at some point calculate what these votes are really worth, since, it's going to be really like an open market, right? Bribe is essentially a supermarket with all these governance votes that people can go shop and buy.
That's exactly right, yeah. And there's interesting stuff there. I mean, when you say supermarket, like, I guess I think of indicative of a supermarket is you have the same thing that's packaged in 80 different ways. And in reality, like, I think we'll eventually find that the certain governance markets, let's say Curve, Tokamak, Aave, as 3 like governance markets, they may start to provide fairly similar or fairly standardized utilities. So my argument for why a single DAO, why Bribe is needed, an organization that can really own this conceptual effort of making the supermarket make sense, is that you can't expect the protocol to do it themselves. To a member of a DAO is a specific, unique thing, and the idea that DAOs would ever be like fully standardized doesn't make any sense. However, the utilities that they offer, their external integration hooks and bridges and these kinds of things, there absolutely can be a standard language for how we think about this. So in a way, I'm not sure if anyone uses like a Zapier or something like this, but in a way, the supermarket metaphor makes me think of a future where governance, governance as a service, like if we're here to coin this term, doesn't take the form of like a tally, but rather governance as a service takes the form of an organization that can stand up a kind of DAO out of the box that is not just the code base that a customer may be looking for, but also access to the liquidity and to the partnerships and necessary integrations that can actually make a new token or a new DAO thrive.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree. It's really interesting if we look at it like that, right? It's really these curve wars and now the toke war. It seems like it's very controlled by influencers and whales, and you really don't know how certain protocols find these tokens to stick into their DAOs. So I think this is really, really fascinating what you're trying to build. I guess my next question would be is how does this differ? We hate comparing stuff, but how does this differ from what's available on the market already? I understand it, but how, if the audience.
Great question. I mean, let's call out what's out there, and preface.
Okay.
Preface being, as in any like properly decentralized status quo, there are many different niches to fill in this in this ecosystem. So we don't think we don't have a zero sum mindset about this. But what is out there? Well, your most traditional form of governance market, I would say, is actually Aave or Uniswap. And that's because it is a place where governance tokens are related to one another and exchanged. If I need a vote, if I need a bunch of votes on Aave, like, I can always do that. I'll just need to somehow acquire $30 million worth of Aave. It becomes more of a question of managing slippage than anything else. So you essentially look at the next generation of governance markets as quite literally managing slippage. A couple of these started to come through with the curve wars, of course, and are worth calling out because, at least in the liquidity directing use case, I believe this was the first instance in which bribery, they actually got bribery right. What do I think it means to get bribery right? Well, conceptually, it means that you are able to equate the value or equate a vote to a monetary value in a given moment. So if I use a vote for X purpose, I'll get Y dollars. This to me is as democratic of governance as we can hope for in DeFi today. Transparent markets for facilitating voting, and that's exactly what we got with the curve wars, where now, again, there are interfaces, there are apps that I can use, where if I am a V curve holder, I can vote with that V curve at in a certain period, and I know how much money I'm going to get for voting. I think what is interesting is the example actually in tokamak, because I think because the tokamak kind of environment, although it's very similar to Curve, liquidity directing, one vote equals kind of X dollars, like at a given time, all of these same characteristics are also existing in tokamak. Hence, it's a natural place for this activity to kind of shift or expand to. The solutions that exist there actually don't seem to have provided exactly the same utility, which is very interesting. Whereas your kind of traditional thought of bribery is upfront, I will know what my, I will essentially understand the market upfront. Bidder buying tokens, a voter, providing the tokens. With the bribery which is happening in tokamak right now, incentives are essentially exchanged and promised after the fact, effectively after the fact. Given that the model is kind of flipped on its head, right? So what we do, which is different, is, of course, Bribe is a staking contract. So our voters kind of commit to vote upfront. The bidder for control of the proposal more or less knows what they are getting. And while the way that this actually plays out sort of depends on the specific implementation of the DAO that the pool is built on, we still retain that right for users to withdraw. So the proposal may be canceled at the end of the day. However, the bidder still has a guarantee for if they are going to pay, if they're going to compensate Bribe, their particular outcome will be brought about. So it's kind of the first solution that essentially seeks to guarantee an outcome for the bidder ahead of the actual election.
Yeah. No, this gets so much more in detail in terms of how more complex the bribing strategies could be compared to where they are now. If we look at, I'm gonna VoteMac, for example, or Votium, it's set up in a completely different manner compared
Right.
to this open market that we're in. Can you talk more in detail? And I guess you did mention it, but I guess more in detail of what the current structure is and in the problems with it, necessarily with we were talking about tokemak bribes. Well, before they had a core reactor, now it's going permissionless. That actually isn't a problem. That actually kind of does increase bribes use case, right? Essentially.
Yeah. No, I would agree. Um, I would absolutely agree, because essentially what I'm hearing there is that these huge toke events, these king-making events, essentially, are no longer going to happen, are no longer going to be hosted and facilitated by tokamak. It doesn't necessarily mean that they don't need to happen anymore. It doesn't mean that it's not a useful thing for a protocol to host a crowd loan specifically for purposes of standing up a tokamak pool. Not necessarily a useful thing that, or it doesn't necessarily need to stop that new toke pools that are collateralized all at once should probably be like spread out over time, so that, to kind of smooth, requirements and these sorts of things. Spread out is in, like, obviously there's like one core vote a month or a quarter or what have you. And that allows everybody to kind of take a backseat for a period of time, assess the situation, come up with their strategy for next time, go back in and participate next time. These kinds of arrangements are necessarily a bad thing. This is why you have, I suppose crowd loans can be permissionless. Balancer LBPs, how we're launching our token, this can be permissionless. It doesn't mean that you don't need a facilitator. It doesn't mean that you don't need an event sometimes to make things go well. So to me, it almost represents a bigger opportunity. There's just so much like creative opportunity that exists in Bribe. What I would say is fundamentally, so that's kind of one point. What I would say is different, however, between what's happening in Curve and what's happening in Tokamak, is that with Curve we have essentially, we just have without kind of diving into all of the utilities that there are and how they all interact with each other, you simply have a more sophisticated market. So you can get to the point where lots of bribery can be facilitated because the outcome of bribery is fairly guaranteed. Again, equals X dollars for a given period of time based on, a certain kind of voting behavior. We can get there with the ecosystem in Curve. What's also important about Curve that I want to hammer home is that it is a purely liquidity directing use case. So we have our weekly votes. The votes are happening all the time. They're always the same. And $1, one vote equals X. Okay, repeating that. Like, very simple. In Tokamak, it's not necessarily the same case. I mean, when you look at like collateralization of reactors, it does require a minimum amount of Tokamak, something like on the order of $100 million worth of Tokamak for the last, series of votes, at a minimum, in order to become a new Tokamak reactor. So the use case is not exactly the same, and particularly for instances where, again, these coalitions are required, these bribe-type coalitions of many voters. It is particularly in these cases where it is very important to have an auction model, honestly. And I would argue that the orientation of Tokamac's DAO toward the core votes so far has actually hampered the bribery activity in the ecosystem. And not to say that it's a bad choice for for the Tokamak for Tokamak for the protocol. Not to say that it's a bad choice for Tokamak. However, it does beget a different approach. It requires that we build a different architecture for that ecosystem.
Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it'll be coming out soon enough. Yeah, so I mean, for Tokamak, we're taking the original model, which is which of course we built for Aave. It's this coalition model, and we have actually extended it to manage multiple coalitions. So essentially, what Bribe users are going to do on Tokamak is stake their toke in support of a particular pool and receive an incentive for their vote. Extremely simple. Of course, the core difference being twofold: that bidders for the support of these coalitions know upfront the incentive that they're getting. Of course, if the coalition chooses to withdraw, if they choose to disband, they can do that, and the bidder won't have to pay. But the upfront bid means that we can attract, bidding activity to the protocol much more easily. Secondly, we can, through our front end, prioritize while creating essentially an incentive pool is permissionless, as it is with comparable protocols, with other bribe protocols. We can, through our front end, prioritize sort of winning pools, such as to build large coalitions. And to defend this, right, we look at the same dynamic that currently exists with core votes. Currently with core votes, obviously, we need the coalition. You have to have at least $100 million or so worth of Tokamak in order to even be a player in governance. Now you no longer need the 100 million. However, certain kind of large protocols that are doing, again, this kind of crowdfunding model still comes to the fore, such that large protocols that want to use the bribe audience to crowdfund for their toke reactors can do so, and instead of accumulating toke or doing their own crowdfund for it, they can bid with USDC.
I think the USDC part is really, really intriguing, to be honest. I think that makes it so much easier for retail. I got to be honest, for non-whales, because they get paid, right? I mean, essentially they get paid. I think that's huge. I think people underestimate how powerful that is as an incentive.
I don't necessarily, right? I mean, that's why I completely agree. Like, I don't necessarily want to tell people, USDC is great, or bidders will always prefer to use, a stable coin rather than, whatever their governance token is for incentive. However, I do know that it makes things really simple. I mean, in DeFi, like, slippage is a huge issue. It's probably worth having. Yeah. I mean, like,
I agree.
A lot of the ecosystem is built around controlling slippage, like, literally.
And that's why Curve exists, and that's why Curve is.
That's why Curve exists. Thank you.
Right. No, I agree. I think if we have price impact and slip, crypto dies. I really do believe that's why I think the wars are one of the most important. This Curve war is one of the most important aspects right now going on, because no one wants to trade if they're going to get wrecked on stables, right? And no one, you're going to kill the whole market. And so the most liquid protocol will win. That's why, they talk about stickiness, and that's why, creating a curve competitor is so tough. Just because you can make it better deserves the number 2 highest TVL in all of crypto, and it's hard to fathom to make a competitor that can trade similarly with such slow slip.
Precisely. And right, like when we remind ourselves of this, I think that is really the pivotal advantage of transacting in USDC. Our voters will accumulate whatever vote exposure they're comfortable with, and then we'll transact in USDC. Buy Toke to your heart's content, stake it with us. Your Toke will be yield bearing, it'll be useful. I don't necessarily know that that we all want to only hold in Toke. Obviously, easy enough to withdraw the USDC rewards and exchange them for Toke if that's what we want to do. So just saying, that is all to say, on the user side, we hope it's not that much of an issue. We hope it's not that much of a burden. However, on the bidder side, it is a key advantage. Like I said earlier, bidders, they know that they're going to be judged fairly. Million USDC is more than 999,000 USDC, and so the $1 million bidder will win. There are no fancy oracles necessary here. It is also quite important that a bidder who already has that bidders have maximal opportunity, honestly, to be minnows themselves. In $100,000, honestly, in $100,000 USDC loan is a much easier thing to get than $30 million worth of Aave exposure. Yet what's being traded at $100,000 equates to like over 100% APY for the stakers of the Aave for the short period of time when it's transacted for like a week, assuming that the governance proposal takes about that long. It means really good APY for the stakers, and it means potentially an opportunity to get on the map to a small bidder who's just made one really good bet, or found one wallet key that they didn't have before, and all of a sudden now they're sitting on 6 figures. This is like the American dream of crypto, if that's not too cringy. Like for us to, for an everyday person to hit 6 figures, and it's not like they're ready to retire off of that, but it has changed their life. Maybe they can I don't know, maybe they're waiting on to get to become an investor or an angel and in a round, or they're waiting to make a huge LP position that just wasn't worth the gas cost before, or they're waiting on something medical or personal. To me, that American dream, that governance dream, as someone who cares deeply and passionately about governance and is not a whale, is that someone in that position can get a proposal passed on Aave. If it's a really good one, and it's really well thought out, and they've put the money up, it's just not going to pass today. But with 100 APY for a coalition of bidders calling themselves Bribe, in that status quo, that person possibly has a future. That proposal possibly has a future.
I agree. Where I'm at an hour, let's open this up to some of the audience and take a couple questions, and then everyone can go back to their Sunday schedule. Who wants to come up? You guys can start, or if you guys don't want to come up, you can either write your question on the Bribe channel or on the AMA Room channel. All right, we got the first one. Raccoon.
Hey.
Invite sent. I added you. For sure. Oh, um, couldn't add you. Anyone else? Who else? See here. For some reason, it's not letting me add. Weird. All right, there we go.
Yep.
There we
yeah,
go.
so it's just one quick question. Earlier you mentioned critical mass of governance tokens, I think it was. And what you mean by that, is that simply like the amount that you would need to enact like a proposal or something like that?
That's exactly right.
Okay, thank you very much. I just wanted that clarification.
Awesome. Who else? Who's next? I got a question here. Someone goes with the bribe proposal. With the bribe proposal on redacted, it was proposed that weekly gauge votes would be facilitated on VoteMac, and core would be facilitated through bribe pools with juiced up APYs.
Yes. Yeah. So that proposal written specifically for redacted, is that what we're talking about?
That's right.
Sweet. Was a kind of proposed as an ideal or an optimal strategy for the DAO for the upcoming core reactor vote, with the understanding that core will stop after this. We essentially adjusted kind of the strategy to what I was discussing previously. From a smart contract perspective, there is no longer the need for a critical mass of tokens to win a single reactor, right? So the question becomes what are, and honestly, this gets to Drip. Perhaps what you were getting at, the previous question. There still remain, even though there is not, again, a requirement for this critical mass of token, this 100 million, there are still strong arguments as to why some kind of collateralization of reactors event or schedule would still be a kind of market optimal kind of state. And so while the strategy did need to adjust essentially from a marketing and comms perspective, now that core is not happening anymore, the fundamental architecture is the same. And the question now becomes more from a strategic standpoint: how do we optimize the benefit that major participants get? Based on kind of having an early critical mass of token staked. Now, what I'm not describing here are differences between how VotaMac and Bribe work. Everything is different. I don't even think that they're necessarily comparable, right? But what I, to refresh what I said previously, Bribe is kind of before the fact, so you have your staked votes, you know what votes you're getting, and the incentive is in USDC. With VotaMac, incentive is distributed after the fact, and it's denominated in any governance token, essentially, any ERC20. So right, an optimal strategy, not surprisingly, actually involves the usage of both protocols for any remaining core reactor votes. Once reactors go permissionless, making the most advantage. Bribe and VotaMac will still not be used in the same way unless a change is made to VotaMac. However, the way for Bribe to optimize its own, its kind of its own usage is to try to continue as much as possible this tradition of core, essentially. It's frankly it's a king making event, right? And not necessarily something that the community wants to see go away.
Yeah. Hopefully that answers your question. I got a bunch of them. The next question is, how does it avoid someone who is, I guess, a whale from manipulating the total votes? So he goes, the example is, what if a single person is able to bribe more than the threshold one that is needed for a moratorium to pass? A bit confused on that one.
If it's kind of bribe against a whale, there are certain ecosystems where am I understanding the question correctly?
I think that's what he's trying to say. I think that's the question.
Yeah, I mean it is what it is. Like, I like to think that we play, this is all about integration strategy and going where we can be strong. Frankly speaking, we've released the details of our private fundraising round, and nobody loves like a protocol that is overly kind of beholden to VCs or private interests or any of this. Again, like amongst friends, amongst this Discord, it was quite necessary for us for two reasons. One was to bootstrap liquidity on Aave, and the other is to bootstrap liquidity on other protocols that we choose to integrate with later down the line as we're building our roadmap. Working with folks who have very large holdings in other protocols, essentially that can potentially be on our roadmap. Goodness, I mean, they're called the curve wars for a reason. This is war, and if we don't get enough community support, if we don't get the requisite votes, then we'll lose it. I believe that what is at stake, of course, is the proper decentralization of protocols and the future of this current generation of DeFi products.
Great answer. I also totally agree. This is a whales war, and you need a lot of money to play. It's just what it is at this point. The next question was, will the bribe community be able to make proposals themselves and not charge a bribe, essentially an aggregate voting power?
That's a fantastic question. So thinking now about sort of V2 of the product, where we really turn these individualized bribe pools into their own DAOs. And these DAOs are primarily built around, better or for worse, fee sharing and the veto functionality. It is kind of the ownership of any particular DAO. So again, participants in the Aave bribe pool are part of the Aave bribe DAO. And that Aave bribe DAO controls the veto mechanism on behalf of bribe. It also controls, some degree of fee sharing. So what's important about this veto mechanism is that it can be used in a couple of different contexts that conceptually make sense for when we think like, a proposal shouldn't be passed. If it fits into some very well understood frameworks of like a malicious proposal, perhaps there's even something on, a smart contract that can be detectable. Perhaps if it interfaces with a list of blacklisted wallets or something like this, then perhaps the proposal is canceled. In any case, one of the use cases for the DAO is to issue its own proposals that can be supported by a very small bid, whereupon kind of the, if you will, negation of the proposal would be vetoed. Again, what does that mean? If the Bribe DAO says we really support this idea and we will bid $1 to enact this proposal, if everyone agrees to that, then, you know, if the whole DAO agrees to such a thing, then anyone who negates the proposal would need the support of the DAO before they issued a negation. Otherwise, the negation would be vetoed. Still very conceptual, as I think you can perhaps tell. Like, we're at the point where we're drawing up architecture for this, so we know the use cases, we know the players, and we know that we're going to build V2 on top of essentially the veto mechanism. However, the intention is exactly, as such, so that the DAO has more autonomy and flexibility with how it uses, the organizing power of the pool. Today, I recommend you all, if the DAO, is talking, thinking about something that it all really likes, I mean, goodness, everybody should just withdraw from Bribe, make the vote, and call it a day, or otherwise, we could just bid for the support of the DAO. But to be honest, like, any of this stuff that happens is going to be better than the status quo, where it's very rare that this sort of behavior occurs.
Yeah. I think that's hopefully that answered the question. I have one. I guess maybe we could just close it off with this question. Is my interest in Bribe working with another project from Labs called Instrumental, and how it's planning on taking advantage of Bribe, I said it 3 times. How it's going to be able to take advantage of this from and using Toke to maximize strategies.
Exactly. If Instrumental is going to be in the next quarter,
we are.
Cheers.
They will.
That is the key use case. Obviously, will get you right. Like, what my day-to-day looks like right now is literally talking to protocols that accumulate Toke and saying, hey, we don't need to do this over the counter anymore. We're building this coalition, and have gotten great reception. So that is kind of the key obvious use case. But in the run rate, like with Instrumental, I mean, I'm just so excited that this is really a project that is booted up in this new paradigm, where blank as a service is available for pretty much anything you could want to do in DeFi. Arguably, governance as a service, kind of joining the ranks, is the final example of this. Instrumental it goes through an LBP, it gets booted up. It's a fair launch. It uses Bribe to get a tokamak reactor. It all of a sudden has, deep liquidity, and a strong use case for the token even before the protocol is generating revenue. It uses this strength to launch the product. The product can immediately trade at volume, based on the strength of the token. Like, I'm not the first one to say that, like, circular relationships and feedback mechanisms are important in DeFi. Of course, we know this. Like, at this point, practically any protocol, like, I would imagine that, that can make these correct initial integrations will be part of the financial behemoth, which is DeFi, and will have a good shot at succeeding if it isn't hacked. Maybe even if it is. And all of the exciting things I know I've seen that you guys are building at Instrumental cross-chain strategies, arbitrage strategies. All of this, simply compounds the fact that Instrumental has already ingratiated itself into the ecosystem and made the right connections that it needs to thrive.
Well said. I totally agree. I think it's going to be obviously a really powerful relationship. On top of that, what Bribe's really proposing, as I mentioned earlier, is so different compared to what exists now on the market. I think that anyone can use it. Any DAO should be, allowed to use it. And I think more and more people will realize the transparency this brings to this current situation of these different wars, where it's really just influencer based.
Right.
Not that, I'm not like trying to go after that. I'm not trying to, but it's just what it is within the current situation. And I don't think anyone will disagree. So that's my take.
I mean, what's the problem with any country that any of us lives in? That it's politician based. I mean, I don't think it's a hot take. Like, we're super long run. We're building for the Web3 future that we all deserve to live in. And at least to me, conceptually, when I think about Bribe, I like to think that I'm thinking about each of these steps. The discussion that we have, before Aave and Toke are successful is going to be the same discussion that we'll have, when we're ready to expand to L1 governance. Will be the same discussion that we have when we're ready to expand to corporate governance. Will be the same discussion that we have when we're ready to expand to real governance. It's about values, and it's about making sure that voters can participate in a meaningful way, in the way that they want to, and that they're not punished for not doing so.
Absolutely agree. Yeah, no, totally. That's I think that's why it makes Bribe so different and so radical in the current, I guess, the current politics of crypto. So I guess the most people are the most interested in Token. So when is Token, and what's the plan there?
When Token? So, man, it's been such a crazy last week. We announced an LBP. It is currently announced for 3 days from now. Let me use this opportunity to ask for your forgiveness. I think that we are going to push the LBP by a week, because the Curve Wars conversation really just hit kind of CoinDesk last week. We want to, we can only LBP once. We want to make sure that when we do so, we have made, a proper effort. Also, in the last week, we've gone from 750 to 1,500 followers on Twitter, right? So we want to make sure that we have a proper effort to at least, give people who are interested in governance a chance to hear about what's happening, to find the handful of protocols that are playing in the space, and to read our docs. It just didn't feel right to the team to action things so quickly. I mean, for us, we just want to launch. We feel like we've been sitting, we've been waiting, but the Curve Wars hype is building, and we really think we would not be doing justice to the protocol if we did not wait until it was at its peak.
Got it. No, totally fair and totally normal. I'm assuming that you guys are going to release a statement this week with the official times and stuff.
If it weren't Sunday, I'd be drafting it up right now. But yes, yeah, it'll be within 24 hours, right? The other thing I'll say about Token is details of our private sale and a fundraising announcement are out. They'll also be pushed on kind of social channels and in like the media world, coin desks of the world, relatively shortly before we actually go live, um, and yes, I kind of said some detail around the decision that we made to do a private sale. Obviously, immensely respect protocols that can have the option to not do such a thing. But I obviously will defend it, just saying that back in May, it felt like I was talking in a black box sometimes when I was telling people about this protocol that we were building called Bribe, and the backing that we have gotten to survive this long, to kind of sit and watch the market while we perfect a product, and the flexibility to also set out the roadmap that we want to following Aave and Tokamak, along with seeding, honestly, that initial liquidity for Aave. These were all very important roles that our investors played. So we hope that activity. We hope that you understand that activity brings more value than anything else. We're not just a widget that is built on top of a curved Wars protocol. Like, there is a lot that we're building for here. Honestly, we didn't even talk about some of the substrate tooling, some of the cross-layer tooling. All of this stuff is going to come out probably Q1 of 2022, and I think it'll be why we took investor money will be a moot point by then. However, this is, of course, the reality of the situation is that these investors are going to be bringing more early value to the token than anything else. The other important thing to note is that due to the investor vesting schedule, being over 2 years, it's not as though we are putting ourselves in a position to get dumped on. These are vesting schedule. We actually are thinking to release a kind of detailed table of exactly what is vesting when. Most of this information can be deduced from what we've released already. However, the important point, right, is that investor vesting happens over 2 years. It means that public token distributions should always exceed investor token distributions, throughout the vesting period.
Yeah, I think you make a good point. And it's fair to say that what is necessary for a project to survive compared to, this is what's necessary to get this done. And if you really understand what's going on, then that's what it needs to be done. I think it's wrong to act in a defensive nature for in a way to make sure that your project gets off the ground. I think that's wrong.
I mean, what it is like, our job is to make a DeFi ecosystem in which it's not necessary anymore, right? But as we're building something novel, and I do think, admittedly, I am defending this a bit, but as we're building something novel, particularly before there was a broad discussion around this idea, the support was very well warranted. The other thing is, I'm not gonna, no hate on anyone who doesn't buy the explanation. There are always new ways and other ways of doing things, and I'm open to that conversation as well. I just kind of wanted you all to know how I thought about the question, and essentially, where the team has been at as we've brought on our earliest partners.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I think you've stayed for over an hour. It's been an hour and a half, so I appreciate you taking your time on a Sunday.
This has been great. Yeah, I hope it's been helpful. It seems like most folks have stuck around. I don't know. I've been here the whole time. I don't know about you, RTX, but
yeah, no, this has been great.
It's been a pleasure.
This is the inaugural Labs podcast, I guess, and it's couldn't start it better with Bribe. But we will share details with everyone here listening, or we will. This is recorded, so we'll share this, and we will also share the new information that comes out with Bribe's activity and what the plans are and what we're doing and what they're doing. So we will make sure that everyone is informed. So can't thank you enough for stopping by, and everyone else for joining us. And I guess that's it for today.
Amazing. Thanks, Phil.